Have you ever wondered why two really smart kids sitting in the very same classroom can have wildly different experiences learning to read or do math? One just takes off while the other struggles no matter how hard they try. Well, today we are going to decode the science of learning. We're going to go from the huge national debates that shape our schools all the way down to the specific support every single child deserves.
I mean, it should be simple, right? You just teach kids to read. But for decades, the how has been at the heart of this incredibly fierce debate. And to really get why, we have to pull back the curtain on the two major philosophies that have been battling it out for control of the American classroom.
So, first, let's zoom out to the big picture. This isn't some new fight. It's really just the latest chapter in a long argument about the best way to crack the code of written language.
Okay, so on one side, you've got an approach called structured literacy. Think of it as the modern, supercharged version of systematic phonics. And on the other side, you have balanced literacy, which actually grew out of an older idea called whole language. Now, they might sound kind of similar, but trust me, their methods are worlds apart.
So what's the real difference here? Well, it all comes down to philosophy. Structured literacy is kind of like building with Legos. You learn exactly what each piece is and how it clicks together before you try to build a giant spaceship. It's explicit, it's sequential. Balanced literacy, on the other hand, is about immersing a kid in amazing books and then teaching phonics more, on the fly. It often encourages kids to use clues like the pictures or the sentence structure to guess what a word is.
So the big question is, which one actually works better? Well, a massive new meta-analysis from 2024 gave us a pretty clear answer. This chart shows something called effect size. It's just a scientific way of measuring how much of an impact something has on learning. And as you can see, structured literacy's impact at 0.47 is more than double that of balanced literacy. When you look at the research, there's really no debate.
Okay, but what does all this big picture data mean for that one kid, sitting at their desk feeling frustrated? To get that answer, we have to pivot. We need to go from the policy debate and zoom right inside the learning brain itself, because that's where the real story unfolds. For an estimated 1 in 5 children, the challenge isn't about effort at all. It's about a fundamental difference in how their brain is wired. We're talking about neurodevelopmental conditions, and understanding what they are is the absolute first step to getting kids the right help.
So, let's start with the most common one, dyslexia. It is not about seeing letters backward, and it has absolutely nothing to do with intelligence. At its core, it's a specific difficulty in the phonological part of the brain. That's the system responsible for connecting sounds to letters. This makes cracking the code of reading incredibly difficult without a very specific type of teaching. And then you have the math equivalent, dyscalculia. This is a deep-seated difficulty with quantity and number. A good way to think about it is a weak number sense. So while most of us just know that 8 is more than 5, a child with dyscalculia might genuinely struggle with that basic concept, which, as you can imagine, makes everything else in math a huge challenge.
And get this, math isn't just one thing. Different cognitive skills are the engines for different math abilities. Doing simple calculations relies a lot on your visual working memory, but solving a tricky word problem, that needs strong language skills and executive function. This is exactly why a kid can be a whiz at one type of math and totally stuck on another.
Okay, so picture this. A parent finally gets a diagnosis from a doctor. Dyslexia, let's say. They bring it to the school thinking, great, now we'll get help. But so often they just hit a wall. This, right here, is what we call the diagnosis dilemma.
See, you've got two different worlds. On one side, you have a medical diagnosis. A doctor uses a manual, the DSM-5, to identify a clinical condition. But on the other side, you have educational eligibility. The school's job isn't to diagnose a condition. Their job is to figure out if a disability is hurting a child's education so much that they need specially designed instruction. They're two totally different questions with two totally different sets of rules.
And listen to this quote from a district psychologist. It really cuts right to the heart of the frustration that parents feel. He says, "Just because he has a medical diagnosis of autism does not mean he will qualify for an educational diagnosis of autism. It can sound like maddening bureaucracy, but it perfectly highlights that critical distinction. The school is answering a different question than the doctor is." So how does the school decide? Well, they use this 3-prong test. It's pretty straightforward. First, does the child have one of the 13 disabilities listed under federal law? Second, is that disability actually hurting their progress in school? And third, do they need special, customized instruction to fix it? A child has to check all 3 of these boxes to get what's called an individualized education program, or an IEP.
All right, this is the moment where it all clicks into place. We've talked about the big reading wars debate.
And we've zoomed way in on the individual learning brain. Now, let's finally connect those dots.
And here it is. This is the key. The solution to that huge, messy societal debate is the exact same solution for the individual child who's struggling. The methods that science tells us are best for all students are actually essential for students with learning disabilities.
Remember this data? That 0.47 effect size for structured literacy? That isn't just a number on a chart. It represents the most effective, evidence-based way to teach reading. And it's the specific, systematic approach that a dyslexic brain literally needs to build the neural pathways for reading.
So what does this actually look like in a real classroom? Well, structured literacy is always teacher-led and diagnostic. It explicitly teaches all the building blocks of our language, from the tiniest sounds to how those sounds map to letters, to different syllable types. It's all done in a systematic, cumulative way. It leaves absolutely nothing to chance.
And what's so powerful is that this explicit, systematic, multi-sensory approach, it's not just for reading. When we apply these same core principles to teaching mathematics, the results are just as dramatic, especially for students with dyscalculia.
Check this out. In one study, students with dyscalculia took a 10-question subtraction test. Before the intervention, their average score was half a point. I mean, basically 0 correct. But then, after just 4 weeks of multisensory math instruction, their average score jumped to over 9 out of 10. That is absolutely life-changing progress.
Okay, so knowing the science is one thing, but actually getting that science into your child's school day, that's a whole other challenge. So let's zoom in one last time and map out a clear, actionable path for any parent or educator watching this. The whole special education process can feel really intimidating, I get it, but it follows a pretty clear roadmap. It all starts with a written request for an evaluation. Then the school tests the child, the team has a big meeting to decide on eligibility, and if the child qualifies, an IEP is written and the services can finally begin. And from there, progress is tracked with data, and the whole plan is reviewed at least once a year.
So, what do you need to have in your advocacy toolkit? First, know the difference between a medical diagnosis and educational eligibility. Second, always put your requests in writing. Third, remember that you, as the parent, are an equal member of that IEP team. And finally, and this is crucial, use the language. Ask for instruction based on the science of reading and the science of math, and ask for their progress to be measured with hard data.
So we've seen it. The research on how to best teach reading and math is unbelievably clear. The methods that work best for everyone are the very same methods that are absolutely essential for those who struggle. Which really just leaves us with one big final question. Now that we know all this, how do we make sure that every single child gets the science-backed instruction they deserve?